To back up a bit, before Futaba woke up, there was an entire month of nothing where the Phantom Thieves basically did nothing but work on other things. Other cases of distortion-suffering individuals, and for Ren, Confidant building. Amidst this, there being an opening of a jazz club, which unlocks alongside reaching rank 4 with Akechi's Justice Arcana, which can be done as early as June 26th, with the club serving special cocktails that can lead to permanent stat increases. The best being the Omnifizz cocktail on Fridays that gives every stat a boost. And on Sunday, if you bring other party members here, then they and their persona can learn special skills outside the ones they would obtain from just leveling up their persona. The most critical of which being any party member, though I did it with Mikoto, learning the skill Heat Riser, which is possible on December 4th, which boosts any party member's attack, defense, and agility for 3 turns. Heat Riser is among the most rare skills you could obtain as well, only high-level endgame persona having it naturally, and you can only itemize one persona in the game, not including DLC, to make it as well, so it's not exactly easy to clone with Yusuke's abilities either. While a party member we've not obtained yet can earn it upon level up, it's still better to double or triple up on the skill due to how much of a boost it is. And the Jazz Club is the only way for any persona of the other party members to learn skills through anything other than level up, as skill cards don't work on them like they do for Ren's. But because of this, it's actually more beneficial to bring Futaba to these outings instead. As in lieu of a new skill, Futaba earns up to 4 stages of support abilities, which are an extension of her metaverse hacking powers. The 3rd stage of which allowing her to cast debuffs to the same stats that Heat Riser improves. And at max level allows Futaba to act more frequently to both buff and heal the party as well as debuff the enemy. And that does add up in the later stages of the game. Though back to talking about confidants, there are actually 3 that I haven't talked about yet which are built up heavily over this period. We are going to save Oya for next time, but for now there is a certain arms dealer that's been waiting for their package.
毒には毒を、俺には使える駒がいるんだよ。このことは誰にも話すな。お前は指示に従えばいい。
我は汝、汝は我。汝、ここに新たなるちぎりを得たり。ちぎりはすなわち、囚われを破らんとする反逆の翼なり。我、軽視者のペルソナの生誕に祝福の風を得たり、自由へと至るさらなる力とならん。
During the aftermath of the raid on Kamoshida's palace, we tried to hawk the metal his distortion turned into at a combination airsoft gun shop and pawn shop, ran by Munehisa Iwai. And in exchange, he also gave us a paper bag he needed taken out of the shop. The package contained a lifelike recreation of the gun using an airsoft substitute, but at the time his shop was being inspected by officers, so we just helped him in that instance avoid his shop being cracked down upon. You can only return the bag and its contents upon building up the Gut's social stat to rank 3, after which we can establish a bond with him through which we can gain access to the customization features of his shop to make real-looking guns for us that increases our weapon effectiveness in the metaverse, as well as giving them some more custom effects, such as them bearing elemental effects and can even cause status ailments. Iwai's Arcana, the Hanged Man, represents wisdom, wariness, and sacrifice normally, and selfishness when reversed. The former more represents Iwai in how he's a reserved and untrusting man due to his backstory revealed over the course of his confidant. And it's for those reasons I feel he represents the Kyoshiro Todo for this case in the Code Geass parallel, with him being a wise individual who tries to impart knowledge to his foolish students as a surrogate parent. Though I admit it is the absolute weakest of any of the character parallels I've approached. But no one else I can think of on that cast even comes close to any type of role Iwai fills. At the very least, the actor role subversion is more straightforward, both in its simplicity and that being the common trait seen of his characters. Hisai Igawa, who voices him in Japanese, is best known as Goldimark from Gao Gaigar, Falco Lombardi from Star Fox, and Engine Buson from Engine Sentai Go Onger. While he's of course had other roles, The recurring motive of them is they are all characters that prefer direct force applied in the fastest way possible, regardless of injury. Whereas Iwai is a far more methodical individual who considers his options and executes the ones he chooses as best he can.
Make the plan, execute the plan, expect the plan to go off the rails, throw away the plan.
Iwai used to be a weapon customizer for the Yakuza, but got out and is doing his best to bury his past and put it behind him. But he's not cautious for his own sake, but because of his adopted son Kaoru. Unlike Sojiro, who took in the daughter of his closest friend, Kaoru was abandoned by his mother at the office Iwai was working at when he was naught but a baby, and Iwai himself doesn't know why. But he saved that child and got out of that life for him, trying to be a responsible man and raise him right. But as if this were a John Wick movie, circumstances keep trying to bring him back in. I'm actually curious if the John Wick films may have influenced Iwai's Confidant, since the first film would have just premiered as the scripting of the game's story would have been taking place, and the second one debuted only a couple of months before the original game released. In specific, an old friend named Suda keeps trying to provoke Iwai into rejoining the criminal underworld as an arms supplier, and he refuses to take no for an answer. Ren's part in this is, as an unknown, he can contact information brokers on Iwai's behalf to help him gather the information needed to put himself out of the corner Suda is driving him into. And Suda is threatening to tell Kaoru everything that Iwai's kept from him. His mother's abandonment, his adopted status, Iwai's prior part in the Yakuza, even that Iwai's mother was a prostitute that destroyed herself trying to keep them fed. It's likely that last one is why Iwai took Kaoru in as a child. He recognized himself in Kaoru even when he was a baby, and knew where he'd end up if nothing was done, and Iwai wanted to break that cycle. Only for the distance Iwai keeps him at, for his own good, to make his son feel like he's a burden, which is acting against his own intent. Suda, however, is revealed to have screwed up a weapons deal with the Chinese mafia, and is writing Iwai to give him replacements before his bosses find out, breaking every code their operations are governed by, because he is the host to a distortion, and is actively threatening everyone around him so his bosses won't find out how much money he lost them by not following their code, requiring that we change his hearts. But that does not fix the problem. As said, not every bad person is distorted, nor are the distortions the origin of all the world's evils. As when Suda resigns and submits himself to judgment by the Yakuza clan's bosses, one of his lieutenants Iwai is familiar with decides to step up, and hold Kaoru at knife point to get from Iwai the guns Suda commissioned, making it so Kaoru learns of his past anyways. But it doesn't matter to him. Kaoru saw the fear in Iwai's eyes when he was in danger to know that whatever their past, he truly does care for his son. Plus, we receive another sign that the destruction of distortions is a good thing, as Suda intervenes to take out his ambitious lieutenant, allowing the Iwais to leave in peace, and for Ren's part in all this to award him a blood oath.
ガキってな成長が早い。生意気に育っても困るが、面白いもんだな。津田も急に変わったよな。あんまニュースは見てねえけどよ。まさにあれが改心なんじゃねえか。だが騙されたもんだぜ。マニアだかなんだかはブラフだったんだな。ただの手駒で雇ったのに、いつの間にか薫の兄貴分か。その怪盗団ってのは俺の銃で悪党を倒してんだろ。困ってる奴を助けるためか。面白い。例の特別メニュー、今まで以上に力入れてやってやるよ。借り作ったままは嫌なんだ。お前だけにとっておきの仕事をしてやる。それが俺にできる支援だからな。
我は汝、汝は我。汝ここにちぎりを血明の絆へと転生せしめたり。絆は反逆の翼となりて魂のくびきを打ち破らん。今こそ汝、軽視者の究極なる非王に目覚めたり。無尽の力を汝に与えん。
Unfortunately, Iwai is one of the few good parents in this game, even if his child is not his by blood. In fact, if you haven't noticed by now, the only good parental figures we meet in this game seem to be him and Sojiro. Ostensibly Ryuji's mom as well, but we don't meet her on screen. And a lot of the rest of the good ones are dead, so they don't really count. It seems like a bit of a writing crutch for this game, when one starts to think about it.
我は汝、汝は我。汝、ここに新たなるちぎりを得たり。ちぎりはすなわち、囚われを破らんとする反逆の翼なる。我、星のペルソナの生誕に祝福の風を得たり。自由へと至るさらなる力とならん。
Regardless, that brings us to the Star Arcana Confidant, which is held by Shogi champion Hifumi Togo, who Ren can reach out to beginning in July once the church location opens up. We seek her out on recommendation of learning strategy from her, and teaching a novice is what Hifumi needs to get out of her own strategic slump. And what's more, the irony of this is again the Lelouch illusion of the P5 protagonist's portrayal, to then need him, of all people, to learn a strategy game from the start to unlock for our gameplay strategies what one would think one would have when we start the game. Or at least when we got enough party members to finally warrant swapping them around. Though beyond that, Shogi is actually a lot more involved than chess is, as it has more types of moves and means of using pieces to better simulate battlefield conditions, such as when not all sides are equal in a confrontation, and what can happen when your own men are turned against you. I know there's a reason in Code Geass why Lelouch wouldn't be shown playing that over chess, but part of his backstory did have him learn it, so it becomes one of that show's base-breaking idiot balls that he rarely considers non-chess-based strategies, as chess in and of itself is actually a terrible battlefield simulator. For this reason, Hifumi acts as the equivalent to Kaguya Sumeragi from that series as well, as one of the people in that setting shown to be one of Lelouch's intellectual equals, who, due to her age, was more prone to act out. As discussed in those reviews, Kaguya was supposed to be a character part of the plot earlier and for longer than she was, but story decisions taken out of the writer's hands that harmed the series reduced her role and involvement immensely, so she only showed up in the back half of the series. And that consequently made her seem like a far less capable child. And as said, actually engaging with her here is another invaluable skill we gain, as her confidence allows us to swap party members around mid-battle in the event one is too injured, or has an elemental weakness to whatever we're fighting, at the cost of the player turn that executed such a swap. As for what she gets out of this, well, Hifumi, like Mikoto and Futaba, is a bit of a chunibyo, and when she plays for fun, she likes to dramatically declare her attacks, as if this was the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. This all coming from the image training Hifumi went through with her father to help her visualize potential moves she could make in the course of a match to counter an opponent's strategy. And because she was taught it so young, she's never been able to dissociate the pieces from the imaginary armies her mind would conjure, acting out their orders in battle. It's an endearing trait to be that involved in and love a game like that, especially as it's a bit of a special connection to her father, who is currently very ill. The problem of this is Hifumi rarely gets to play the game for fun in order to express that. She's Japan's shogi champion, and she is generally good at the game. But someone can learn more from defeat than a closely gained victory. And the problem she's been finding as of late is she realized she was making big mistakes in her strategies and play in tournaments, and her opponents would never capitalize on them. This, as is revealed over the course of her Confidant Arc, is because her mother is threatening and extorting her opponents, so she is not winning her matches fairly. All because her mother is living off the fame of her child's genius. But without legitimacy to those wins, Hifumi herself is a fraud, and that can only last for so long. And were officials in charge of the tournaments to find out, Hifumi would be banned for life from competitions around the game she so loves, and wants to become the legitimate best at. And her mother is stealing all that away in her greed and vanity, claiming it to be for the good of her family due to her father's illness, but it's just to make her own life easier. Especially harmful to Hifumi's mental well-being as well, because of her alignment with the Star Arcana, as the star is meant to symbolize hope and bright prospects. but when reversed can reflect abandonment, arrogance, and impotence. All things Hifumi's mother is risking Hifumi to be slandered by were her actions to be uncovered. Fortunately, her practice partner is an illustrious phantom thief, ran intervening to stop her mom before this all escalates, and allowing Hifumi to announce what her mother's done, to then gracefully resign from her title, and work her way back up to being the best, the right way. Now, there is another reason why I consider Hifumi to be the Kaguya of this game, and it wouldn't exactly appear to be so from the outset, due to just how simple and straightforward a Confidant story hers is. And that is, Hifumi was initially considered to be made a phantom thief when the game was being planned, just as how Kaguya needed to be introduced into Code Geass' story during the R1 section for her to play her role in the story correctly, but was pushed back into being added in R2 instead because of Sunrise insisting that CC actually have more character story episodes that did nothing for the plot in order to promote Yukana Nogami as a talent, and the replacement for what was meant to be Kaguya's introduction instead became that show's worthless Mao arc. This initial rudimentary plan for Hifumi to be one of the thieves was revealed in a monthly talk show Atlas produced in lead up to and following Persona 5's release, called Persona Stalker Club V, with it being specifically the 5th episode of that talk show where this was discussed. And one of the co-hosts of that talk show is Hifumi's voice actress, Tomomi Isomura. However, any plans the staff had to make Hifumi a phantom thief were scrapped very early in the game's development for one simple reason. Her personal plotline in no way relates or connects to the conspiracy storyline for it to make sense for her mother to be a palace ruler deliberately seated and empowered by them. Her family being in debt means she couldn't be a financial backer like Madarame or Kaneshiro. Her mom's duties caring for her husband limit her own activities to shape youths into potential indoctrination like Kamoshida's role was. Neither her or Hifumi have technical or legal skills to become corporate assets, and their financial situation makes them unable to be an ally turned rival, as we'll be discussing with the Okumura chapter. She literally does not make sense from a storytelling perspective to be a phantom thief, have a parent with a palace, or be involved with the conspiracy story at all. Whereas everyone else, bar An and Ryuji, does. And that's why they scrapped it. Hell, that's why Mishima and Shiho likewise were considered for Phantom Thief roles either once they started actually writing the story. Now I want to reemphasize, this initial idea was changed very early in the game's development, to the point that there are absolutely zero assets in the game files to imply they ever even prototyped a stage for her mother's palace, as this idea was discarded before they even got that far to begin building monster models and level maps for the game. There are admittedly some unused assets for a palace planned in between two of the last ones for the original game, and even a file code associated for them to show where it would have been placed in gameplay order. But they are associated with the enemy Persona user, the Black Mask, which we've repeatedly heard of. And that one was also scrapped early enough that we likewise don't have any unused concept art for it, as it did not make sense for a Persona user to have a palace to begin with. This, for all intents and purposes, also parallels another thing from Persona 4. For those of you who don't know, the Persona fandom developed a misconception about Detective Ryotaro Dojima in that they wrongfully believed that he was supposed to be the killer of the game, lashing out against the town for not being able to solve who killed his wife years before. And so he'd had a psychotic break, and would have been a downer ending to have to put him behind bars after he caused the murders. And the fandom obtained this misconception because an interview from the creators of the game was mistranslated. What the creators were actually talking about during this interview, which made people think Ryotaro was supposed to be the villain, was that his initial visual designs for Ryotaro made him appear visually a lot more gruff and villainous. This did not mean that he was meant to be the killer in that game. That was always meant to be Toru Adachi, and was not a last-minute change. It is literally in his dialogue all game long that he is taunting, obfuscating, and deliberately misdirecting the cast from fingering him as the killer. You pick that up if you pay attention to the actual story. And consequently, the same thing happened here. Everyone who brought up this talking point refused to actually get the footage of the interview where they revealed this to verify the information. Thus, it became a telephone game where the details got more and more distorted. So a lot of Persona fans in the know think this omission was a late-end change, when it wasn't. It was one of the first things they scrapped. While they had character designs and a personality and a draft of a personal story for Hifumi to go with it, they hadn't even written her into the story yet by the time they realized it wouldn't work with the ways they were developing the story, and that she would in truth be redundant to other characters in the cast more essential to telling their tale, while having no relevance of her own to the story by which to actually make her important to it. Hifumi can't replace Futaba because she has the wrong skill set. Hifumi can't replace Makoto due to Makoto tying directly into the overall themes of the game as the second protagonist. Acts as a narrative counterpoint to Akechi regarding their warring sense of justice, and is a linchpin to eventually getting Sai on our side. And Hifumi cannot replace Haru, not just because we haven't gotten to her stuff yet, but because she cannot provide the same trigger mechanism the next section of the game requires to leverage its end goal, despite the similarities to their respective stories that, honestly, Haru's plot with her father just has more viable material than someone committing fraud in the way Hifumi's mother is. Now, I did see one fanfiction writer try and make an entire brothel of fraud arc to show how one could escalate Hifumi's mother into being a palace ruler, but the end result of it was ridiculously derivative of the other existing palaces, and far smaller in scope, unconnected to everything else, as they missed that each palace and ruler matches with a specific sin. And ironically, because of the game's localization changes, making them think Futaba's was sloth instead of wrath, a lot of people thought they could just double up on sin associations, when that was not the case. Hell, go down the list, and the only ones you could substitute her in for are An, because their association to a palace ruler is solely based on location, and that ruler's deeds up against them, or more relevantly, Yusuke, because of how her mother's distorted sin is formatted as a potential alternative for vanity, because her mother is fixing her matches as much to maintain an image of Hifumi as the champion, and her father's successor in the tournament scene more than as a means to make money off of her, thus making it forgery versus fraud. Most toxic fans who hate on Makoto, or even Haru because of what she's finally focused on, think one of them were her replacement, when no. If it was going to be anyone, it would have to be Yusuke, as Yusuke of all the cast members is the least directly associated with everything else going on. And there is the oddity in his story where his mother's murder is the only example of a palace ruler committing an openly criminal act that far in advance before their palace was formed. Now, admittedly, you also have Kaneshiro being a career criminal, but his con artistry and scams were comparatively a more recent development in his life than a 16-year-old covered-up murder case. And Kaneshiro's involvement in the conspiracy explained by their mutual benefits, with his palace forming around his immunity to criminal prosecution as its linchpin. Couple that with Yusuke being known as one of the last characters to be developed for the story, and that's a more likely case of where the substitution happened, to not make one character over another feel as derivative as keeping Hifumi would have done. And Yusuke already provides a more active and relevant asset with his skill card creation ability. Plus, the party character balance would have been off with so many girls in the cast, when the Persona dev team tried to maintain something resembling a closed gender balance for their given ensembles. Give or take the bonus character inversion extensions. But again, I must emphasize this. This change was made so early in development that the game's script wasn't even done being written yet. They were still storyboarding the plot when they found anything and everything they may have wanted to do with her was nothing but a shallow square peg trying to fit into a deeper round hole. Thus, once again with this game, the discourse is dumb, ignores the actual intentions and plans for the story as well as what it actually did, and I side with Atlas again in that this change was the best decision to make with what their plans were. I just wish they hadn't released this information the way they did to make it seem like there was more than there was going to be. And whoever translated and spread it should not have made it seem like this was a last-minute cut instead of one of the first things they changed their minds on, as there is zero evidence this was an 11th hour exclusion. there is literally no substance of content to say it was. And this actually got me angry when I learned about how bad this discourse was over something mistranslated, because out of the literal years of bitching, moaning, and complaining about what the game should or could have been, these same hypocrites outright ignore what the game actually was, and why they didn't do some of the alternatives and changes the production staff have discussed. I think it's because of this that I'm actually more sour than others towards the plausibility of Hifumi being a legitimized paramour as well, as there's nothing really there to warrant it over the other options. There's merit to using someone they'd scrapped their original idea on for a new role, but just the baggage that came from the fandom over the whole matter has just left it to be a waste.
八百長が分かった後も、あなたは私を見捨てないでいてくれた。誰かに信じてもらえるのって、こんなに心強いものなんですね。新手開発の手助けと将棋の指南。最初はただの取引だったんですけどね。でも、いつの間にかあなたは私にとってかけがえのない人です。私、もうヤジは気にしません。今度こそ実力で周りを認めさせてやります。我は汝、汝は我。汝ここにちぎりを血明の絆へと転生せしめたり。絆は反逆の翼となりて、魂のくびきを打ち破らん。今こそ汝、星の究極なる非王に目覚めたり。無尽の力を汝に与えん。
Moving on, the start of the second term happens with a broadcast from the government looking to crack down even more heavily on the Phantom Thieves, assembling a task force to go after them, despite, again, they have broken no laws. Like with Lupat, their biggest crime is humiliating the police amidst exposing corruption, and the resulting civil unrest caused through exposure of the government's failure, so they want to blame the whistleblowers and discredit them instead of those actually corrupt or criminal due to their disruption of the status quo, as the status quo matters to them more than the criminality. Every time. Every fucking time! Fortunately, we're going to be able to get away from that nonsense for a short trip, as right after the start of term comes, the traditional school trip for the better funded schools in the country occurs. The protagonist class getting rewarded with a trip to Hawaii! How much money did that freaking cost the school to do that? Like, this just all the more makes it seem like the Persona 4 cast got gypped by their school-funded vacation being to another school. Well, while this group is having fun on the shores and sandy beaches of an island state, Mishima set up a poll on the Phantom Thieves website about what popular ne'er-do-well in society is deserving of a metaverse intervention. And this is a bad idea. While the thieves need more notoriety and awareness in the popular consciousness to dive deeper into Mementos, creating a poll for a target is nothing more than the masses putting a hit out and persecuting someone that may not deserve it. After all, earlier parts of the storyline have already presented that the conspiracy is causing psychotic breakdowns in people to frame other individuals they are associated with for crimes and incompetence, or otherwise as a means of control. While this group is not aware of the full conspiracy just yet, this is the same type of manipulative tactic that can easily be taken advantage of by them to then cause the very incidents to raise public consciousness against the ones they were targeting, and then be able to blame the consequences of that hit on the thieves in the same way they continue to deflect blame for their actions onto everyone else but themselves. Gee, I wonder what is the exact thing that is going to be the end result of all this. Now, the irritation you might hear in my voice is, once again, not exactly being directed at the game, but it's localization that obfuscated this, and the fandom that entirely missed this as a result. Yeah, Persona 5 is a long game, but isn't exactly subtle about a lot of this. That is in fact why we have all these cutaways to Sai and her bosses, and why these news segments they deliberately put into cutscenes matter, because it all shows how the conspiracy is deliberately manipulating people into making choices that are against their own best interests. The story showing and emphasizing how monstrous they are over time, so it builds up and up their malice to everyone, so as to make it so the audience would not want to forgive the perpetrators behind these actions. and then an insufferable portion of the audience didn't get it. Hell, this is actually the point where the plots begin to more closely intertwine. During the day out at the beach with everyone, Futaba confessed how scared she was at the possibility of being taken from Sojiro because of Sai's aggression against them, prompting Futaba to manufacture a USB drive that would clone the data on Sai's computer in order to learn why she was suddenly targeting them for Wakaba's cognitive science research. And it's something Makoto ultimately decides to go along with, not just because it might help the thieves find more targets that deserve changes of heart, whom the criminal justice system had been unable to touch, which ironically is the last thing Sai wants, as her losing those cases to confessions invalidates her own efforts and makes her look incompetent, and also to potentially find a lead on the Black Mask Persona user causing the breakdowns to begin with. I don't know why they'd need it, they haven't exactly been subtle, and most players paying attention caught on to who it was from the start. But Makoto wants to learn what has been eating at her sister to make her come off as more and more deranged and argumentative. And that's something she realizes goes back to well before this year, where there's been this simmering black bile beneath the surface that's only become more visible as her patience has been worn away. Because the duties forced upon her beyond her role as a prosecutor are eating away at her. In the same way, going against her morals was driving Makoto up a wall during her chapter, when Kobayakawa was doing the same thing to her. Again, point, counterpoint. You don't get this without Makoto being here. And speaking of Kobayakawa, as happens when the school is emptied for these trips, he learns of a certain tabloid ad written by a certain reporter friend of ours. An article written from the perspective of someone deeply in the know, which happened around the school during the mess of the Kamoshida incident. One that is among many written by this same reporter, telling of the justice of the Phantom Thieves, and how they've done much to help others, not harm people. A collection of articles written by someone they cannot touch, then undermines their entire scheme to frame the thieves in the first place. And because Kobayakawa has done nothing but fail in this role, it's time to cut off a loose end. Kobayakawa's official date of death is September 12th, nearly 2 weeks after he was fired, and 3 days after the SU director signed off on killing him, while the rest of the cast is off in Hawaii. While his collapse in the prior scene is out of fear and panic for his potential elimination, there are some who think that is when his shadow is killed, and it takes a bit of time to catch up. When, no, it's after the SU director agrees with it. There's still possibly some sort of delay, but not that much. Regardless, they only choose to execute him when they would have known that the Phantom Thieves would not have been in the country. But of course, they wouldn't have been able to reveal their alibi at a time where the justice system is, thanks to the conspiracy, already assuming that the thieves are behind the breakdowns and shutdowns as failed changes of hearts. And for the mystery plot in attempting to determine who the actual traitor is, it thus exonerates anyone among them that is already there, leaving just Futaba, who would never work with them, and Morgana, who they can't talk to unless they've been into the metaverse already. But before we actually head off to Hawaii, there's one other case we have to take care of. A problematic Mementos target revolving around a video game cheater who stalks around the arcades, which actually completes a set of targets that justifies a Mementos trip. Futaba's inclusion in the party allowing them to observe Mementos' expansion, which is a bit of another translation error, as the purported expansion is just us accessing another region that already exists, which we've been locked out of. Someone else has already expanded these paths into the popular consciousness, we're just being made aware of them as we gain access to them, and now can actually see its scope thanks to Futaba's scanning, which is leading Morgana to feel irrelevant, as now that this group is experienced in everything he could teach them, they're outright outpacing him. Anyways, the actual cheater we're after, Nejima, has as part of his distorted cognition the belief that he is invincible, and that's why he cheats. but this delusion prevents us from defeating him as our weapon skills with guns are not proficient enough to overcome him. And unless we can outshoot him in the way that is his weakness, which is an echo of the video game Gunabout, we can't actually defeat him. Meaning, we need a video game tutor.
我は汝、汝は我。汝、ここに新たなる契りを得たり。契りはすなわち、囚われを破らんとする反逆の翼なり。我、当のペルソナの生誕に祝福の風を得たり。自由へと至るさらなる力とならん。
This event is what unlocks the Tower Arcana after we get back from the trip, by us learning from the young boy Shinya the gun tricks that make him an ace of the game Gunabout. And from maxing out his Arcana, we gain special gun kata moves for the final length of the game, as well as increasing a user's maximum ammo. And for maxing out the Arcana, guns gain the capacity to completely ignore resistances to damage the enemies might have. Even getting the first rank with Shinya gives us the technique we need to deal with that Mementos mission, but there is of course more beyond that. For Shinya is in fact an avid fan of the Phantom Thieves, and then bringing justice to those who need it, which is itself a form of wish fulfillment by proxy for him due to his worsening relationship with his mom. Shinya's a pretty smart kid, with him immediately pinning us as, you are, but you can't say you are, with regards to his fanboying of us. And his cause for teaching us is him getting to know and understand us, and why we haven't exactly helped him. He doesn't say such immediately, but the truth is he's been hesitant to make a request regarding his mom, who more and more has just left him to raise himself after a messy divorce from Shinya's father, despite her helicopter parenting about everything around Shinya himself, and going out of her way to antagonize the school he attends and the parents of his classmates, as if it's their job to raise her son, since she doesn't have the time to do it herself. And Shinya thinks it's all his fault for not being strong enough that she has to spend more time on other people instead of on him. Which, as someone who had their parents divorced when I was really young, when you don't know any better and lack a grasp of adult matters, you can unintentionally think it's your fault your parents don't like each other anymore, when the entire matter is bigger than you. Shinya's a smart kid, but anyone can get trapped in that false mentality when you're too young to really grasp the context. Hell, I fell into that for a time, but I felt stupid retroactively for feeling that way when I learned what the reason was. I'm not going to get into the specifics here, it's not the place for it. Drop by one of my streams if you want to ask about it. But the long and short of it was my mom was not good with money or managing savings accounts. Regardless, that perceived weakness of himself has become a complex for Shinya, wanting to be the best at something so he wouldn't be ridiculed for his mom's actions, when the reality is he's only causing his own isolation due to how defensive he's become over it, especially as he's tying his own mental health and well-being to whether he's good at a video game. I mean, streamers and certain YouTubers can, but that's turning a hobby into a career after becoming an adult, and even that can be unhealthy for us doing this if we obsess over it. A child doing this? Not so much. Though that mindset from Shinya isn't so surprising, considering the Japanese actor for them is Aki Kanada, who's voiced an assortment of one-off characters in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. This all makes sense thanks to the Arcana of the Tower, which reflects misery, distress, adversity, disgrace, and ruin, or in general, unforeseen catastrophe. In reverse, it means negligence, absence, carelessness, and apathy, all of which can be addressed with a guiding hand and a mentor to speak one's problems to in order to not let Shinya turn himself into a selfish asshole bully by taking the wrong lessons from his mom, with him eventually bringing the request himself for us to help his mom, and we give him a calling card in turn to hand over to her, allowing us to see that her mother's aggression that she's passing on to her son is all rooted on the mom being crushed under the societal stigma towards divorce I discussed early in all this, and her distortion having been making her preemptively attack everyone around them, regardless of the harm it does. Removing that allows her to get the chip off her shoulder and worry less about the appearance of how she raises her son, and actually raise her son right. and that care makes all the difference for Shinya's health and well-being as well, completing out his social link, with him being the only major character or confidant in this game that I cannot think of a Code Geass parallel for, unless one wanted me to compare him to Kid Lelouch, which is water I am not treading.
ごめんなさい。やっとわかった。僕、自分勝手だった。あんなことしたんだから。できないかもしれないけど、許してください。お金、貯まったらすぐ返すから。どうする？あ、それだけだから。来てくれてありがとう。
どういうことだ？ショットに行けねえ。
はい、ここ。体を狙うんじゃなくて、そしてここ。
バカな。すげえ。チャンピオンが撃てねえ。認めないぞ。こんな負け認められるか。人生終わるんだよ、そんなことしたら。
終わらないよ。負けてもちゃんと続きがあるんだよ。ここで心を入れ替えなよ。でないとあんた本当に終わると思うよ。誰も助けてくれなくなるよ。僕、あんたにそうなってほしくない。勝つことがかっこいいって思ってた。でも優しいのもかっこいいね。負けたら終わりじゃなかった。始まりだった。いろいろ苦しんでお兄さんに助けてもらって、僕変われたんだ。今度は僕がいろんな人を助ければ、母さんとか友達とかまだ知らない人も。
我は汝、汝は我。汝ここにちぎりを血明の絆へと転生せしめたり、絆は反逆の翼となりて魂のくびきを打ち破らん。今こそ汝、当の究極なる非業に目覚めたり、無尽の力を汝に与えん。
But if you haven't noticed, well, there's a reason I continue to skip over Oya, in that for Confidants, we have a theme going around parents and their children, which thus plays into the arc of Haru and her father that is the focus of the latter half of September and October in the story. Anyways, we're off to Hawaii.
とにかくバカな真似やめてね。ここは日本じゃないんだから。
Oh, why stop now?
アンもなかなかだと思ってたけど、やっぱ外国人と比べるとあれだな。お前もそう思わねえ？やっぱ外国人はボリューム違うわって。
Case in point. But yeah, this is where we have our proper introduction to Haru Okumura. As I touched on in part 1 of these reviews, we first encounter her at the beginning of the game 6 months ago, and have been seeing her in events throughout the game ever since. Despite being a third-year student, she agreed to help the teachers in Makoto as a chaperone, as to keep her a week away from her father, and all the trouble he's been stirring up and forcing her into, when her personal focus is just on growing things. Haru taking part actively in agricultural studies around the school, just to avoid her father, Kurikazu Okumura, who's been considering her to be more and more of a possession over the last few years. And she's not the only one. For Mishima's poll on the Phantom's website has quickly been making the elder Okumura be the popular target, due to him being the head of Okumura Foods, and having allegations against him, including but not limited to underpaying their employees at their restaurants and food poisoning. Okay, explanation time! In 2014 and 2015, when this game was being written, there were a series of fast food scandals revolving around unsafe working conditions, unsanitary products, and expired meat being sent to and served by locations in Japan. The source for the expired meats were all coming from their Chinese supplier, Shanghai Husui Foods. And China's inability to provide sanitary food exports had been an issue for years before, meaning the companies affected, which were all American fast food chains like McDonald's and Burger King that do exist and operate in the country. It's because they didn't try and buy their supplies local and wanted to wholesale from Chinese suppliers that happened, and it actually had been overlooked for quite some time, because the health and safety inspectors had been getting paid off. So the Okumura arc is once again relevant social commentary as, of course, in the wake of those scandals, more traditional Japanese restaurants and their own fast food chains got a surplus of business. This only begins to escalate once everyone returns to Japan, for as said, the suspicion is seated about the Phantom Thieves possibly screwing up a change of heart due to Kobayakawa's involvement in the prior incidents, or it was an accident caused by the article exposing even more of his responsibility that he couldn't take. Regardless, the website in the wake of it is getting flooded with comments of support, many of which are fake comments from the false MedJed tech guy who has infiltrated the site, all done to inflate the Phantom Thieves' ego and convince them to target Okumura in reflection of the poll and the worsening public scandals around his company.
罪どころか社会問題まで怪盗に解決させようとしている。
ちょっと怖い。
Yeah, because societal problems have to be fixed through popular acknowledgement and consensual agreement to stop and fix them. You can't force it, and tricking people into it doesn't work forever. It's why it is important context in the game that the distortions the thieves remove and destroy are not naturally occurring, as they're just taking something that shouldn't be there to begin with.
私たちが知ってること、本当に正しいのかな?
But here's where the data from Sai's computer comes in. The most recent sect of the breakdowns and shutdowns cases happen to deal with them caused in such a way that it benefits Okumura Foods and their main fast food chain, Big Bang Burger, which we've actually been eating at throughout the game as well. And Okumura, as another of the financial backers of the conspiracy, has access to calling in their special agent, by which to cause incidents that benefit their business. That Sai has uncovered these connections is a credit to her capabilities in her profession, but she's kept quiet about all of this in order for her to continue building her airtight case before bringing it to her bosses, completely unknowing that they are in on this. However, much like Kobayakawa, Okumura has become a liability to the conspiracy due to him being too excessive in using the Black Mask persona wielder to trigger breakdowns and shutdowns to advance his company's standing. Thus why they're making him out as a target to the thieves, and if they don't do anything, then Sai is their backup plan to get rid of him. And it is not unheard of when one company has a scandal, then those in the same industry come under bigger scrutiny. This is actually a developing case at the time I write and record this in 2023. I have linked a video here explaining it in more depth, but the Japanese used vehicle chain Big Motor was found by investigators to have been committing insurance fraud at instruction of the son of the company's owner, them damaging cars brought to them to deliberately make it so their customers would have to pay more or bill their insurance for the damages as a means to make free money. And the insurance company Sompo Japan was found to be in on the scam in order to deliberately inflate the rates they collect. But when the hammer started to be brought down on them, and how they were doing so was brought to the public's attention, consumers raised warnings about the other two major used vehicle chains in Japan having been exploiting the same tactics after company insiders jumped ship to their competitors and informed them of the scam years before. As of when I record this in October of 2023, they are also under investigation, but considering when this video is supposed to go public will make it so almost a year would have passed, there's likely been several developments in that case that I in the past am not privy to, so anything could have happened at that time. But that is pretty much my point. When all but one company in an industry ends up facing such scandals, it means one of three things. Either they were actually operating above board, they're better at covering up their misdeeds, or they were engaging in corporate sabotage. And in Persona 5's case with Okumura, it is a combination of options 2 and 3. For as is revealed, Kurikazu Okumura is a palace ruler, and thus has been able to exploit the perception filter effect to make it seem to the unaware like he has done no wrong with his decisions. But even then, that starts to strain credulity the farther down the corporate ladder you go, as that becomes so separated from the man himself that the consequences of his actions can still be felt by the workers of the company and the populace observing them outwardly. However, despite all the signs that they should go after Okumura for what he's been doing lately, something feels off about this. And how artificially the Phantom Thieves' popularity has suddenly been inflated to out of nowhere. Like, they haven't even done anything publicly in months to warrant it. And the frenzy has been kicked up by the company's actions, political candidates, and, of all people, Goro Akechi seeming to endorse their actions now, while still saying they need to be stopped. Something weird is going on. So for all they know, targeting Okumura is a trap. Spoilers, it is. But what pushes the entire matter over the edge is Morgana aggressively insulting everyone for wanting to not rush in, and we see again why I ended up disliking the game's mascot so much, as instead of calling out their cowardice, he goes out of his way to insult specifically Ryuji, when Ryuji defers to people he knows are smarter than him, as him listening would prevent him from going off half-cocked like has gotten him in trouble in the past, and his character arc was all about him learning from that so he wouldn't fuck up like he did again, and as a result, he has not been. Ryuji knows to trust his friends and their opinion even when he himself still has his knee-jerk responses or disagrees, and one of the Phantom Thieves' rules is they need to have consensus on a target before looking to deal with their distortions, which they don't have here. And that consensus helps them to not make mistakes they will regret. So Ryuji standing down is him abiding by the rules they all collectively set so they wouldn't target the wrong people. Moreover, before they talked him down, Ryuji was on Morgana's side of the conversation in saying they should move forward before they made him reconsider. So Morgana insulting specifically him for making a wise choice to not be impulsive when there is no consensus already is a legitimate line cross for Morgana, as he alienated his only ally in this debate. It was at this point in the game that I just became completely sick of it from this damn cat and his hypocritical and selfish attitude. And I'm just as tired of the game for continuously excusing it while trying to frame it as Ryuji being in the wrong, when all he ever did was just retaliate in kind to the bullshit Morgana would throw at him. Seriously, there are people who hate Ryuji specifically because of his back and forth with Morgana, and claiming Morgana didn't deserve such abuse. And I can't agree, as there is at no point in this game where Ryuji ever fucking starts it. That's in fact the entire point of his character story. He never starts any of the trouble he gets into. He only ever retaliates to it in kind when he feels he is being mistreated and held accountable unfairly. Morgana's feelings have been hurt because of what Ryuji says back to him? Well, maybe Morgana shouldn't have spent the entire storyline being a complete asshole! And again, for those who may feel like I'm being too defensive over Ryuji, well remember, I am taking Ryuji's side in this because no one else fucking will! This insufferable out-of-place antagonism Morgana causes leads him to leave the Phantom Thieves. Oh no, so terrible. To go off to solve Okumura's palace on his own, once again flippantly ignoring the rules they set in place explicitly so one of them wouldn't abuse their powers like this, leading him into contact with a certain floofy-haired girl, which is only going to cause problems for them as the Okumura activities have convinced Sai that the Phantom Thieves are all behind it.
Okumura と怪盗団との間に接点があれば会ってくれないと困るけどね。
So, from a metatextual storytelling perspective, if one was not paying attention to the conspiracy plot and aware that Atlas gave away who the traitor was in the first fucking chapter of the game, this was part of the feint and red herring the writers had planned. By this point, they had expected players to have completed the blood oath of all of the introduced characters, and not consider Futaba for the traitor at all, which just leaves Morgana, or another character not introduced. Morgana's sudden out-of-place abrasiveness would be explicable with regards to not wanting the rest of the team to actually think about their actions, and him working with someone else to cause the incident Sai is investigating in his zeal to return to being human. Especially because his confidant automatically levels, via story events, the further into being a Phantom Thief we go, which backed up suspicions about him, as there's resultantly no way to know in advance if he was in fact working with the actual killer all this time. He wasn't, he's just an asshole. But this is why we have that odd tangent of him going off with Haru. For the next time we see him, it is when he's being beaten up, with a feminine frame above him, and after that we see him with a completely different Phantom Thief. And when the team decides to enter Okumura's palace to stop Morgana from doing something really stupid, we find Haru all suited up as a Phantom Thief with a black mask. And as established already, the costume is a manifestation of a Persona user's rebellion. They cannot get it unless they have awakened as a Persona user. That has been the rule throughout every other awakening in this game. That Haru herself defies that rule is done for the sole purpose of making her out to be the actual culprit we've been chasing, as all the recently publicized mental shutdowns have been framed by the game as suddenly benefiting Okumura, which would make sense for a Persona user acting out to help their parents succeed in their goals. Furthermore, helped by how this is someone where, while we have seen them, and Makoto knows of them, none of them have in any way formed a bond with them. The pieces all seem to fit, except for one major flaw. It is too obvious. Like, literally, it is too fucking obvious for the big bad we've been chasing all game to be Haru. Not just because it would be contingent on this extremely nice and moral individual having a dark side to them no one sees, and oh yes, she has a sadistic streak a mile wide she doesn't normally let out, but because it ties a bow too nicely around everything that you actually start missing and forgetting the other pieces of the conspiracy plot that are not part of the whole picture if Okumura was the chief backer for it. After all, why, if Okumura is the head of this conspiracy, would he need other financial backers like Madarame and Kaneshiro? Why would he have that controlling a hand in a school to make it into a place that could endanger his daughter, especially if she's a hidden asset to his success? Why steal Wakaba's research and cover up it even exists if they already have a functioning Persona user? Hell, why make it so Okumura Sr. has a palace in the first place? Or for that matter, the other ones, if their goals are to just sabotage other companies? And then you remember the details about the companies not being the most active targets, but those in the government like the afflicted members of the transportation departments. I could go on, as the more you think about Haru being one of the actually intended villains, the less sense it actually makes. Which again leads to my frustration with the toxicity of Persona's fandom, as then you get back to the idiots in it that think Haru not being the villain was a last-minute change, when she and Okumura Sr. were red herrings from the start. And as I inferred again at the beginning of this, her role as a red herring was not just deliberate, but obvious from the perspective of the actor illusions being utilized throughout this game, as Haru's voice actress is Haruka Tomatsu, most known before this role as being the joyful knight Canderilla in Zuden Sentai Kyoryuger, who spends most of the series being one of the villain generals, but because of her origins as a monster meant to deliberately create joy in people for harvest by her boss as a means of reviving and empowering themselves, it means her nature is normally one meant to be kind, and it was only her origin that made her malicious, leading to why she is a character that is eventually led onto the path of reformation, as her losing someone she cares for because of her own faction causes Canderilla to conceptualize what it means to feel sorrow, and from there in the series climax, joins the Kyoryuger team in ending the threat of her creator and the more malicious monsters brought to life by him. As from sorrow, she now understands what it means to feel true joy. Remember that bit. That comes back later. And again, for anyone wondering why Haru is the axe-wielding sadist member of the party when her Phantom Thief attire more sells her as a swashbuckler, it is that same actor-illusionary role being invoked. Though of course, this is not the only character Haruka Tomatsu is known for. She's Asuna Yuki in Sword Art Online. She's Kinuho Wanai in the Raildeck series. She's Milena Vashti in Gundam 00. She's Lala Sataline Deviluk from To Love Ru, and 02 from Darling in the Franxx. I could go on from this, but the point of the casting and the overt homages to the prior rule of Canderella was in order to once more bait expectations, like it has been for most of our allies having at least one major social status quo destructive role in their repertoire. But quite frankly, they leaned too heavily into it, and consequently ended up creating narrative issues with the rest of the game just to seed the idea in people's heads that Haru could be the killer, when she was never planned to be. In this case, it's just deliberate bad writing that was done in order to force the game in a direction it has a reason to go in, but done in such a way that makes the experience repulsive to the audience. It is the Code Geass R2 problem. The characters have reasons to do the things you want to depict, but a deliberate choice was made to not make their actions align with those reasons, because the mindset the story was approached from did not permit those reasons to be considered. Mind you, none of that is Haru's fault from a character or storytelling perspective. Until we actually start focusing on her father's palace instead of Morgana's crap, she's just being dragged along for the ride, which is all disruptive to the establishment of her as a person, and causes people's issues to begin with. As the stuff focused on the Elder Okumura is where the chapter does improve. The true problem all lies in the writing around this event, which introduces her as a thief to try and pull off this misdirect, and is considered outright infuriating, all due to how the game has handled Morgana, and that's unintentionally splashing itself onto Haru, thanks to how Morgana has been a smeghead since his introduction. She is unfairly given blame for unknowingly enabling his crap, and stigmatized by fans simply because much of her introductory chapter is stuck focusing on his nonsense. For the other problem from all of this is, it's very obvious that Morgana has dragged her into this out of his own jackassery, endangering both their lives for nothing but his own ego. We back out of the palace to try and talk to Haru in civilian form, her spilling the beans that Morgana was the one that led her into the metaverse, and inevitably been poisoned against them because of it, taking Morgana's side because she hasn't seen how much of an asshole the cat is, nor has context to his backstabbing. Not helped as well that Haru is desperate to change her father's heart, not just because of what he does to his employees. His cognition of them in the palace shows he only views them as disposable robot slaves doing any menial task they're assigned, but how he's more and more treated her as a possession herself. And had she actually talked to the thieves and told them about this and her circumstances, those would have been legitimate cause to sway their opinion. For as has been established from past incidents, individuals being actively harmed by the distorted is a good cause to intervene due to their time-sensitive natures. It would be something to make them overlook the abnormality of the populace in supporting them en masse, which in its own way can be dangerous thanks to the poll manipulation. And again, that exact thing is happening. Hell, Haru's actually been making it worse, as Haru's the one that it turns out was leaking all of these incidents of abuse and scandal to the press to try and get her dad to come to his senses. Worse, because Morgana is just using Haru as a form of one-upmanship, there's other ways he's endangering her, as her polite mannerisms have led her to start replying to people on the Phantom website as Morgana leads her through fulfilling their requests. That's something the police can trace back to her. They need to stop Morgana from his utter bullshit before his recklessness ruins her, and he should know better, but he doesn't fucking care. Again, it's all ego to him. A perception of him being valued and wanted that he only doesn't get because he treats everyone around him like shit. You know, there were actual existential questions Teddy in Persona 4 asked about himself as part of his arc, which informs his story, moroseness, and levels of his self-loathing, which they're trying to ape to an extent with Morgana in his arc to rediscover himself. But it doesn't work because any form of empathy I may have had for his situation has been bled dry by his mistreatment of just everyone around him. This, to me, is genuinely one of the worst sections of the game, if not the worst section of the game, because of the shit Morgana keeps pulling. And Howard once again makes Ryuji the butt monkey of it all by trying to frame it as his fault when he did nothing wrong. Morgana is and has been fucking useless from the start, and as we learn later, isn't and never was human. His constant selfishness is grounds for him to get flack he never accepts, and the game never holds him accountable to. I'm surprised there isn't more calling out of Morgana in the fandom as the problem, but I think just too many people outright accept Ryuji as the cause when he never starts any of these incidents. So trying to chase Morgana down as he drags Haru into danger, when I already have a bias against the fucking cat, is as far from appealing as one can get.
こっちは足がない分、簡単に逃がしてしまうわね。
Your persona is a motorcycle! God, this section of the game keeps fucking rolling an idiot ball. And as if to prove my words prophetic, him just jumping Haru out of the metaverse in his refusal to listen actually puts Haru in danger. She has a fiancé her father is effectively selling her to in the name of his own political ambitions, and that fiancé treats her like trash, to the point she's had to have her father's guards protect and escort her around simply to protect her from him. Yet now Morgana's put her in a situation where she is all alone with no one to help her against him as he assaults her again. It's actually thanks to our intervention that such doesn't happen, the group scaring him off, which allows Haru to tell them of the other incidents. Again, had Morgana not poisoned her against them, this could have been told up front and been a deciding factor for them to go after Okumura for enabling this kind of abuse to his own daughter, who knows it's useless to talk to him about it. Hell, her fiancé's assaults on her are all why Haru's been able to get around the perception filter effect with him, as it's technically exposing all the crap her fiancé's been doing as part of her father's exploits. You know, don't think about the person with the perception filter active around them, and you can see what they're doing. It's like trying to find an invisible man in smoke. You still can't see them, but due to how the smoke is being displaced, you can see where their presence has an impact to find them. This incident finally forces Morgana to come clean about his bullshit, and once again to prove I'm not crazy with siding with Ryuji all this time, Morgana admits he was just making excuses to fulfill his own agenda. That he'd realized he'd gotten too close to this group despite how he mistreats them, and had abandoned trying to find himself again in the wake of everything else going on, despite this constantly moving him forward towards his goals. Thus tried rushing it to his and Haru's respective detriments. But all things considered, it's not an apology I can accept, because the underlying behavior and emotional abuse he lobs at others, especially Ryuji, has shown no sign of change from the start. At the very least, Ryuji himself was owed a personal apology, but as the butt monkey of the game, it's not one he ever gets. And that's not even considering how Morgana has made Haru's situation worse, as Okumura just doesn't even bother to listen to what Haru's fiancé tried to do to her, just treating her coming marriage as a foregone conclusion and completion of a business contract due to him caring more about contractual obligation than Haru's own emotional well-being. Again, as I brought up earlier, marriage contracts such as the one Haru is being forced into were originally meant as a means to permit a potential couple to feel out and see whether such were compatible, only for such to be abused over time into just becoming a formality to an actual union that was treated as a foregone conclusion. And because Okumura's distortion is making him see everything in the terms of business assets, that includes his daughter as something that serves as a means for a transaction. What makes this worse for Morgana is Haru actually did leave a request on the Phantom website for help at the same time they were considering what to do, and it was Morgana's tantrum that prevented them from seeing it, which would have swayed their decision to then side with him. That's why she even went through with being used by him to get her own way. But again, all that was needed to convince them was a personal cost to not intervening to get them to step up, and they have that now. With them thus having a few weeks before the marriage contract is finalized, by which to remove Okumura's distortion, and Haru wants to help in doing that.
こっから先は廃人化事件の犯人を相手にするかもってことだ。メメントスの修行とは違うぞ。覚悟しろよ。
いきなり説教かよ。
甘い。春は 戸後ろに毛が生えた程度なんだ。
Just to show that I was not kidding about Morgana's apology being insincere as hell, as he does nothing to change how he treats others. The apology is the start. You have to follow through and not repeat the actions and behavior you are apologizing for. And again, he didn't even really apologize to begin with. The real issue is part of that narrative snarl the red herring created. The story now claiming that Haru did awaken as a persona user, but did so in such a way that her persona has not manifested, which results in all sorts of problems logistically in how that is even possible. Worse, Morgana is only bringing this up now, after he dragged her into the metaverse several times already with an unawakened persona, which could have gotten her killed instead of just swallowing his own damn pride. But now that he's back with the thieves, he's trying to drop Haru like a prom dress. Again, I have legitimate grievances against this cat and part of the story, but none of that is Haru's fault. It is solely Morgana's and the writers and their bad attempt to pull out a twist this late into the game. It actually ends up taking a while before we're ready to perform a proper infiltration of Okumura's palace. Most of September being to just build up the next states in the Confidant ranks I've already discussed. Though two events on our road to Okumura's palace stuck out to me. One of them being a movie Futaba wants to see. Back to the Ninja. I fucking swear, if they ripped off my favorite movie just to put fucking ninjas into it, I will! And the other is an event on October 3rd, tied into Royal's new confidants, Dr. Maruki and Sumi, as the vice principal is using both of them to try and boost the school's image, threatening to revoke Sumi's honor student status if she doesn't do better at her gymnastics meets than she already is, and Dr. Maruki calling that out as only acting to have a worsening effect on Sumi's psychological state due to her still working to overcome the trauma of her twin sister's death. But they don't care, as all that matters to this lot is the image of success. Now that they can actually do anything to truly bring out the best in their students. So, just the educational system in general then.
私、弱いな。先輩にも、丸木先生にだって、迷惑ばっかり。私は、吉沢かすみなのに。
Overhearing all of this, Sumi wants to talk to Ren since we've been a big part in why she's been able to improve. Wanting to meet Odaiba where they'd had an encounter previously, where it turns out the Meta-Navis spread to her phone as well, sucking Joker, Morgana, and Sumi into a hidden palace, where Sumi is confronted by her own shadow, which doesn't even recognize her. As in truth, her own cognition has been heavily distorted by the abilities of this palace's ruler. One of the palace's guards attacks her, speaking of her spurning the palace ruler's mercy to her, as if she can't do anything herself. Which she's just fed up with entirely, for everyone looking down on the dream she's carrying on in her sister's name.
私だけじゃない。私たちの夢まで悪く言うのは許せない。自分の都合を押し付けて。勝手な期待をして。勝手な結果を求めて、私じゃ無理だって言うんですか？私を誰だと思ってるんです？私は吉沢かすみです。不器用な子。灰をかぶったままよりも灰染めの映画を選ぶ。そういうことだね。けどそれがあなたの決めたことだというのなら最後まで付き合うよ。
我は汝は我。契約という名の魔法を受け入れなさい。
仕切り直しお願いします。今度はサンドリオンと一緒です。
Now again, we're getting more into this when we actually discuss the Royal exclusive chapter of the game, as it's been a criticism of the Royal versions that this awakening seemed too easy for Sumi to pull off. The counterpoint to that is, again, the game has been trying to deliberately not repeat the screw-up Persona 4 Golden made with Marie, and shoving her into everything as the special. She has her own side plot going on amidst everything else. We have small segments of automatic interactions with her. The half of her Confidant we can do shows how deeply she's driven to improve herself, and how she's becoming more and more frustrated with her own poor showing, and the adults constantly telling her she can't, that her best isn't a fraction of what they demand of her to the point it's distorting her own self-image. And she's sick of it, and pushing back against all that. The ease of her awakening here comes about more because, thanks to Ren, she's been actively pushing back against her own self-loathing and rebelling against it. So this just acts as a more overt crystallization of what we've been seeing of her extended arc throughout the previous 6 months of the game. That it's been dragged out is why it feels like it's been done too fast, as the steps to reaching it have not been sequestered into its own monthly chapter like everyone else's has. And as the Phantom Thieves are at the height of their popularity now, this is why Sumi's awakening resembles Joker's own, with her own persona, Cinderillion, being based on the story of Cinderella, of someone seeking to persevere through adversity to obtain the ending they desire. But just to reinforce once more how the storytellers were not trying to make her the special, Sumi turns down being a regular member of the Thieves, but will be willing to back them up in the event something goes wrong. In part because her gymnastics mean everything to her, and to give them up would be to prove everyone she's rebelling against correct, but metatextually having her join as a regular and intrude on the story would make such a larger headache with regards to story revisions and unintentionally make her an overt special member that would only cause the very problems the Persona 5 development team wanted to avoid. But you can't please some people who thought all of that anyways simply because she was a new character introduced as extended content. I really don't get the hate for her, as she really doesn't do anything wrong enough to warrant it like I've been calling out with Morgana. This scene on October 3rd was again just to act as a seed to the royal content where we deal with this aberrant palace, and it'd be ridiculous to just make it so nothing narratively connective or cohesive happens in the rest of the story to bridge reaching this new extension. Like, that's one of the reasons people had problems with The Answer for Persona 3 FES, after all. Anyways, on October 4th, I begin the group's first proper infiltration of Okumura's palace, which shows he is a gigantic space case. The Okumura Foods corporate headquarters have been turned into a futuristic spaceport and orbital elevator, all manned by shadows having taken the form of robots. A lot of the complex has been sealed off by biometric scanners, requiring Haru to be present to even bring them down. Something not discussed previously that more than justifies Haru being here. And another reason why Morgana was again in the wrong in basically every circumstance for a while now. But Haru's easy passing through is a reflection of while Okumura knows Haru exists, he doesn't think much of and about her, as opposed to his business interests and how even she can help advance them. And because of that, with Haru being the daughter of a wealthy man, those around Haru only thought of what they could gain from her, and not about her.
柄の悪い連中とは手を切れと言ったはずだ。
てめえ！
前に言いましたよね。お父様のために私なりの最善を尽くすと。これがその答えです。
そやつら例の怪盗団か。そういうことか。許しを請うために差し出すわけか。孫は裏切ってでも取り返す。奥村の娘らしくなったじゃないか。いいだろう。こっちへ来い。
With our combined strength, we can end this destructive conflict and bring order to the galaxy.
I swear they were doing that deliberately.
なぜそうやって損得ばかりなのです。会社の悪評だって全部そのせい。人を部品としか考えてないからでしょ。
得るためには差し出す。人の上に立つにはより多くを差し出す覚悟を持つしかない。蹴落とす冷徹さこそビジネス。情だの仁義だのは敗者の言葉だ。奥村フーズ私の勝利の礎となれ。
社長、こんな賊の手垢にまみれた女はうちにはいらない。何か情報をいただかないと父に取り次げないな。
もはや制裁は望まない。愛人でも何でも好きにするがいい。
いいでしょう。手を打ちます。
でもこんなの話が違います。お父様個人の野心のためにこの男のおもちゃになれと。
何を今さら。奥村の娘にとってはそれこそが喜びだ。お前など初めからその程度の価値でしかないわ。
さあ来てもらおうか、俺んちへさ。
ゲのゲね。
決めたようね、宿命の家のお姫様。あなたには裏切りなしでは自由がない。それでも求めるというなら間違ってはダメ。さあ、あなたは誰を裏切るの？
心はとうに決まっています。
いいわ、その目。これで本当の力が震える。我は汝は我。美しい裏切りで自由の門出を飾りましょう。
The fully awakened Haru, codenamed Noir, wields the power of psychic and gun skills to add to our arsenal. As said before, she wields an axe in battle, and her ranged firearm is for some reason a grenade launcher. Which of course is one of those things that stretch credulity for the idea that Ren was making ammo for those in the original Persona 5, thus why Royal is better regarding its ammo mechanics. But because the grenades are once per round, that is why her persona, Milady, is one of the few that learns gun skills. And because few enemies have resistances to psychic or gun, it's why she's locked as far into the game as she is. Her persona, Milady, is based off of Milady de Winter from the Three Musketeers stories originally by Alexandre Dumas. Milady is one of the classical depictions of a femme fatale, seducing and manipulating men to get away with her own schemes. But her true past frames her as a victim of her family's own schemes that forced her into being a nun. But wanting nothing to do with that life, she convinced a priest that was there under similar circumstances to run away from their convent with enough resources stolen from the complex to start their lives anew. But that going wrong led to her being branded as a criminal by the priest's brother, who was to be their executioner, for no other crime than breaking the oath neither of them wanted to swear. And it only goes downhill from there for them, as her thematic rebellion was from parental authority, leaving her no choices of her own, and every single thing she does as a villain in the tale is consequently rooted from just wanting to have freely lived her own life, only for that brand to act as a stigma against actually retaining the true happiness she sought, leaving her no other option than to flee into more open acts of crime, and in her case, becoming a spy. But since her first husband tried to murder her because of the brand, and in the story there was no sign she was ever plotting against him, it more muddies the water in more modern interpretations that she was an actual villain from the start, or justified in her seeking revenge on that husband for that wrong, who is revealed to have been Athos of the Three Musketeers. I'm actually surprised there hasn't been more exploration of the character in this context, of her seeking freedom but ultimately having no choices because she refuses to be bound down, and her own rebellion going badly as a result thanks to the sexism of that era. But for Haru, it means her powers are now at full strength alongside all the others. Which leaves another question for Morgana.
ちゃんと教えてあげたの？
教えた。
はずなんだが、伝わらなきゃ意味ない。
Once again, vindication for Ryuji. No one at all understands the metaverse when Morgana explains it his way. It is only when they get the elaboration in the way Ryuji originally requested it that it be delivered, which he was ridiculed for asking for. Does any one of them, not already familiar with the concepts, in any way comprehend it? Fortunately, because Haru was sleepwalking through eternity with her awakening, it hasn't completely exhausted her to wake up as she did, permitting the infiltration to continue, allowing the group to learn of Okumura's grand schemes. As beyond his success in industry, the distortions of his palace have led him to gain ambitions to become a politician, especially with his awareness of the conspiracy's actions to sabotage the government, leaving a wide swath open of potential positions to obtain. And Haru's marriage is part of that due to Japanese corporate sexism, where he has no intention of actually handing the company over to Haru, and instead wants her prospective husband, who is already a high-up official in the company, to inherit management of it through their marriage. This is in turn why Okumura Sr. has turned such a blind eye to what the man does to his fiancée, because the business is bigger than him, his ambition is bigger than them both, and his greed to obtain it, which has overwhelmed him thanks to his palace's distortions, means he's willing to sacrifice what he has to reach higher towards his goal. Ergo, why we see this sci-fi tower of Okumura's more and more cannibalize itself just to get that little bit more, that little stretch higher, instead of establishing a firm foundation and slowly building it up. And this highlights again the contrast between Kanashiro's gluttony and Okumura's greed. As again, Kaneshiro could not get enough of what he already had, while Okumura, once attaining a goal, instead turns his eyes to a new thing he wanted and began sabotaging the well-being of what he had in order to obtain his new shiny thing that caught his attention, as he didn't even consider what he already had and its worth by comparison. But again, greed is not by default bad. Desire is something natural. All the root emotions of the sins are natural. It's when it becomes in excess that the sin is born. To climb the way up the tower, we have to steal employee IDs in the metaverse to gain access once Haru's authorizations can't take us any further. But as Makoto notes as we climb up, despite everything telling of Okumura's political ambitions, we've not seen anything about him being responsible for the mental shutdowns. It's as if he doesn't know anything about them personally, and was only making use of a service the conspiracy he was part of provided to push his agenda. Yeah, it's called Karoshi, death by overwork. I mentioned it earlier with Kawakami's Confidant. It's especially prevalent in corporations that understaff their departments and expect workers to work 12 hours a day, every day, against the regulations of labor laws, for no other reason than it's company cultural normalizing such crunch so they don't have to properly fund each department, even though the overtime has to be more costly. And that's speaking as someone who has exploited Amazon's overtime policy several times for extra cash, but am quite sick of needing to volunteer to take 60-hour weeks for a couple months a year. However, it's become such a rampant socio-cultural problem in Japan that there has been active pushback over it, and it's only in more recent years that corporations have begun to take steps to decrease the prevalence of it, primarily because expecting employees to dedicate their life to doing nothing but work has been a large contributing factor to Japan's population decline, as those suffering employees don't have time to, meet a significant other and raise a family, especially due to the corporate sexism that expects the wife in the relationship to quit their job to become a full-time mom, when wage stagnation also mandates that both parents be working in order to fulfill the bare minimum requirements to raise a child. You literally cannot have it both ways. Honestly, I'd almost say it's baffling how naive Haru comes off as to not know about this. But if she's really been that sheltered, not just because of her wealth, but due to her social isolation, it does make some sense for why she'd be unaware of common corporate abuses, and insist on changing them. Though while I dig the futuristic sci-fi theme, as I am in truth really a sci-fi guy over anything more fantasy-based. Side note, why are there so few actual space-focused RPGs out there? I know of a few, I've reviewed a few like Mass Effect and Super Robot Wars, but they are a significant minority and I desperately want more that aren't just straight up dystopian. I have to agree with popular consensus that Okumura's palace just ends up a slog due to everything you have to do and the diversity of tasks to get through it. Diversity of puzzles is normally good to keep players from getting bored, but in Okumura's palace it just becomes so esoteric with the means to solving them that by the end you're just done with them, and are beyond ready to just have Haru hand her father his calling card so we can start our confrontation with him.
暴利を貪る強欲の大罪人奥村国和殿、お前の利益と世界的な名声は従業員への非道で成り立っている。故に我々は全ての罪をお前の口から告白させることにした。私は敗者にはならん。
Though this is not helped at all either from the boss fight that results from this. And I swear the writers have the same taste in films as me, as the way Shadow Okumura plays Haru in this next scene, approaching her as groveling on his knees in apology as if he's already realized what he's done, is straight out of Spaceballs.
許してくれ、ハル。お宝を盗まれたら私はもう終わりなんだ。やめてくれ、五章だ。頼む。
お父様。
I guarantee it. Would I lie?
もう終わりにしましょう。
おお、ハル、なんとバカな女だ。
Bespin, don't bet! Ah! No.
Fool you!
Though it's all to force one last act of character development out of Morgana. But as I've said, to validate it, it needed to be the end of a character arc of him no longer treating his teammates like crap, which he still continues to do, even after apologizing to show how empty it sounds. Instead, Morgana steals the show from Haru having this exact poignant counter-debate at her dad, which would have better fulfilled her arc here. Regardless, this brings us back to Shadow Okumura's boss fight, and his manifestation of the demon Mammon. Mammon in the Bible was usually just considered wealth as an evil influence, with later Bible scholars more recasting such as an evil demonic influence that made people become obsessed with excessive wealth. While not a normal interpretation of a demon associated with greed, it is still one that makes a logical sense. But the fight in turn echoes Madarame's, how Okumura does not fight himself, but calls up all the minions he has left from throughout the palace to just stall us until his shadow can launch his cognitive spaceship, which would put him beyond our grasp. Well, that, or it's his cognitive expression of him calling for backup from the conspiracy, who he expects to take care of the thieves. Thus, how they would know whether their plan has worked. What complicates this further is the new status ailment for this battle, hunger, which debilitates cast members from being able to act due to hunger pains. And the issue with this is, you actually have to keep this status element on at least one party member, because later in the battle, Okumura starts lobbing giant Big Bang burgers at the party, which do damage to you unless the character is hungry, after which the status element is automatically cured. It's not often where we have a boss battle where one of the mechanics to survive them is to stay suffering a status ailment. The only other one I can think of off the top of my head is Unalesca from Final Fantasy X 2 decades ago. I kinda want that to be a bit more common, but admittedly if you don't balance the mechanics of it, they can be insufferable. And the hunger mechanic here is a bit overcooked. Past that, it's just the sheer number of waves that Okumura sends against us that begins to tax the party and drain their SP. But eventually we reach the end of them, leaving just cognitive Haru as his only defense.
私はもう お父様の言いなりだった私じゃない。ノワール、体力少し。
春をもってしても仕留められないとは。誰もいい。誰かいないのか。
Because to the head of a criminal corporate organization, everyone is disposable.
お仕置きが必要だな。
Haru's rebellion has secured the change to our own fortunes, and with Okumura's defeat, we get him to confess that he would hire through a contract the actual individuals responsible for the breakdowns, but doesn't know them personally. But with the removal of his distortion, which turns out to be nothing more than a vintage plastic model kit, I came here to have a good time and I'm feeling so attacked right now. Well, with that gone, there would be nothing preventing him from confessing to the police once the palace collapses. All except for one. All according to plan.
実は
奥村さん、
なんか様子が変だぞ。
先生の描いた通りですよ。怪盗団が奥村を狙うことも、改心を成し遂げることも。都合のいい財布が一つ減りはしたものの、つながりが明るみに出るリスクに比べれば、奥村はもともと正解という器ではなかったのに、おとなしくしていればいいものを。抜かりありません。彼に処理は依頼してあります。しかるべきタイミングで廃人化を起こす手はずとのことです。不出来な身内と怪盗団の大掃除、一石二鳥とはまさにこのことですよ。